The courtroom was packed. Tension filled the air as Judge Vanessa Carter took her seat at the bench. A respected and fair-minded judge, she had seen all kinds of cases, but nothing could have prepared her for what was about to unfold. Across the room stood Officer Mark Reynolds, a man known for his rigid views and quick temper. He wasn't just any cop. He was the arresting officer in a controversial case that had sparked heated debate. But today, he wasn't here to testify. He was here for something much bigger, something personal. From the moment he stepped forward, his body language was aggressive. His voice carried a sharp edge as he spoke, cutting through the courtroom like a knife. The way he looked at Judge Carter, the words he chose, it was clear. This wasn't just about the law. It was about power, about control. Then, in front of a stunned courtroom, it happened. A blatant act of disrespect, so shocking that the entire room fell silent. But what he didn't expect. Judge Carter wasn't one to back down. She had spent her entire career fighting for justice, and today would be no different. As the tension reached its breaking point, the entire courtroom waited to see what would happen next. Would she let it slide, or would she stand her ground and fight back? The room was frozen. Eyes darted between Judge Carter and Officer Reynolds, waiting for her response, but she didn't flinch, she didn't even blink. Instead, she studied him, calm, measured, as if deciding whether he was worth her words. Reynolds, however, wasn't done. He took a step closer, his presence looming over the courtroom. His tone, laced with condescension, carried the weight of someone who had always gotten his way. People in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. The tension was thick, almost suffocating. Lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. Even the bailiff, who had seen his fair share of courtroom drama, looked on with concern. Everyone knew Judge Carter wasn't just any judge. She had a reputation for being fair but firm. She had spent years breaking barriers, proving herself in a system that wasn't built for people like her. And yet, here she was, being openly challenged in her own courtroom. What made it worse was that Reynolds wasn't just some rogue officer. He had influence, connections, the kind of backing that made people think twice before standing up to him. But Judge Carter wasn't most people. She had worked too hard, fought too many battles, to let a man like him intimidate her. Still, one question hung in the air. How far was Reynolds willing to go? And more importantly, what was his real motive? Judge Carter finally leaned forward, her hands resting lightly on the bench. Her voice was steady, controlled. "Officer Reynolds, is there something you'd like to say to this court?" For a brief second, there was silence. A flicker of hesitation crossed Reynolds' face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He smirked, a smirk that sent a chill through the room. "Just making sure I'm in the right place," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Didn't realize we were running things differently these days." A low murmur rippled through the gallery. People weren't sure what they had just witnessed, but they knew it wasn't right. The attorneys at the defense table exchanged wary glances, as if debating whether to speak up. Even the clerk's hands hovered over the keyboard, unsure if she should be documenting what was unfolding before her. But Judge Carter had dealt with men like Reynolds before. She saw through the arrogance, the false confidence. This wasn't about a case, and it wasn't just about her. This was something bigger, something personal. Reynolds wasn't just challenging her authority. He wanted to humiliate her, to remind her of the unwritten rules that people like him never had to say out loud. Still, why now? Why this case? Carter knew the officer had a history, but there was something about his timing that felt calculated. The courtroom watched as she studied him, her mind already working through the puzzle. What was he really after? And more importantly, how far was he willing to go? The room felt colder now, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on everyone inside. Judge Carter held Reynolds' gaze, refusing to be the first to look away. But something about his expression unsettled her. Not the arrogance, not the smirk. It was something deeper. A certainty. A man who knew he held a card no one else could see. Then he stepped closer. Too close. The bailiff instinctively shifted, ready to intervene, but Carter lifted a hand, a silent command to stay back. She wanted to see where this was going. "You look nervous, Your Honor," Reynolds said, barely above a whisper, but loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Maybe because you know what's coming." A flicker of something passed through her chest. Not fear, something sharper. A warning. She had handled difficult cases before, received threats, dealt with pressure from powerful people. But Reynolds wasn't speaking in vague threats. He was speaking like a man with a plan. Across the room, a lawyer cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Your Honor, I'd like to request." But before he could finish, Reynolds chuckled and shook his head. "No need," he said, turning to face the entire courtroom now. "We're all about to find out the truth anyway." Judge Carter narrowed her eyes. "The truth? About what?" And then the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The heavy doors swung open, and the entire courtroom turned in unison. A woman stepped inside, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She was tall, poised, and confident, someone who commanded attention without saying a word. But it wasn't just her presence that sent a wave of murmurs through the room. It was who she was. Jessica Monroe, a high-profile defense attorney known for taking on impossible cases and winning. But more importantly, she was representing the very defendant Officer Reynolds had arrested, the case that had ignited controversy, the case that had brought Reynolds into this courtroom today. Judge Carter kept her expression neutral, but inside, her mind was racing. Jessica wasn't scheduled to be in court today. What was she doing here? And why did Reynolds look so pleased to see her? As Jessica approached the defense table, she set down her briefcase and took a slow breath. Then she spoke. "Your Honor, I have new evidence that changes everything." A stunned silence fell over the room. Reynolds folded his arms, smirking. "Told you," he muttered under his breath. Carter's grip on her gavel tightened. Whatever this was, it wasn't a coincidence. Reynolds had known this was coming, but why? And more importantly, what did this so-called new evidence mean for the case, and for her? Judge Carter's heartbeat steadied as she sat forward, locking eyes with Jessica Monroe. "Proceed," she said, her voice firm. Jessica pulled a folder from her briefcase, hesitated for just a moment, then handed it to the court clerk. "This evidence," she said, turning toward the courtroom, "not only clears my client but exposes a cover-up." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Even Carter felt a jolt of shock, though she kept her face unreadable. But Reynolds, he didn't flinch. He just leaned back slightly, watching with an almost amused expression. He knew. He had known all along. The clerk handed the file to Judge Carter, and as she flipped it open, a chill ran down her spine. It wasn't just a simple piece of evidence. It was a collection of internal reports, body cam footage, and statements that directly implicated Officer Reynolds in misconduct. Not just in this case, but in several others. Cases that had been quietly buried. Cases that, if brought to light, would ruin his career. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Judge Carter processed what this meant. But before she could speak, Reynolds did something unexpected. He smiled. Then slowly, he stepped forward. "Go ahead, Judge," he said, voice eerily calm. "Read the last page." Carter turned to the final document and froze. Her own name was on it. The paper detailed a formal complaint filed years ago, accusing her of misconduct. Falsely, she realized instantly. It was a setup, a desperate, calculated move. If she ruled against Reynolds today, this document would be used to destroy her credibility. The room held its breath. For a long moment, Carter didn't move. Then she looked up, not at Jessica, not at the gallery, but at Reynolds. "You think fear wins cases?" she asked quietly. "You think intimidation is justice?" Reynolds didn't answer. He didn't have to. His smug expression said it all. Judge Carter straightened in her seat. "This court does not operate on threats. It operates on truth." She turned to the clerk. motioned to dismiss the false complaint against me immediately. Then she looked back at Jessica. And as for this case, she tapped the folder. The truth speaks for itself. The courtroom erupted, some in relief, some in outrage. But Reynolds, for the first time that day, his smirk disappeared, because now for the first time he realized he had underestimated her. And he never saw what was coming next. The courtroom was electric, filled with murmurs and hushed conversations. But Judge Carter remained steady, her decision made. She turned back to Officer Reynolds, her eyes unwavering. "This court will not be used as a weapon for personal vendettas," she said. "Justice isn't about who holds the most power. It's about the truth." Reynolds clenched his jaw, but for the first time he had nothing to say. His confidence had cracked. He had played his final card, and it hadn't worked. Jessica Monroe, standing tall at the defense table, nodded in silent approval. The truth had won today. And as the bailiff stepped forward, ready to escort Reynolds out for questioning, the officer finally realized his time was up. As the courtroom emptied, Judge Carter let out a slow breath. She knew this fight wasn't over. There would be backlash, more battles ahead. But today, she had proven something important, that no one, no matter their status or uniform, was above the law. Outside, the cameras flashed, reporters shouting for statements. But as Judge Carter stepped past them, she didn't stop. She just walked forward, strong, unshaken, ready for whatever came next. Because justice wasn't about fear. It was about standing firm, no matter the cost.